When my son-in-law convinced me to sign what he called a simple donation, I had no idea I was signing away everything I'd built in 72 years of life. I thought I was helping family. Instead, I was writing my own destruction. My name is Vernon Barnes, and at 72, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal life could throw at a man. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It started on a crisp October morning in 2023, here in my hometown of Cedar Falls, Iowa. The maple trees outside my kitchen window were turning that brilliant red that reminded me why I'd never left this place, despite all the opportunities that came my way over the decades. I was sipping my usual black coffee. Patricia always said I drank it strong enough to wake the dead, when the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, I could make out the familiar silhouette of my son-in-law, Marcus Chen. 28 years old, sharp as a tack, with those perfectly pressed khakis and button-down shirts that made him look like he'd stepped out of a business magazine. He'd been married to my youngest daughter, Sarah, for 3 years now, and I'd grown genuinely fond of the boy. "Morning, Vernon," Marcus said as I opened the door, his smile as bright as always. He carried a leather briefcase and wore that cologne Sarah had bought him last Christmas, something expensive that smelled like success. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just arguing with the crossword puzzle," I chuckled, stepping aside to let him in. "Come on in, son. Coffee's fresh." Marcus had this way about him that put people at ease. Maybe it was his background in investment banking, or maybe it was just natural charm, but he could make you feel like you were the most important person in the room. As he settled into Patricia's old chair at the kitchen table, God, I still kept it exactly as she liked it, even after she'd been gone 3 years. I noticed he seemed a little more serious than usual. "Actually, Vernon, I wanted to talk to you about something pretty important," he said, accepting the mug I offered him. "It's about your estate planning." Now, I'd built Barnes Construction from nothing back in 1975. Started with just me, a pickup truck, and enough stubbornness to outlast any competitor. By the time I semi-retired 5 years ago, we had 43 employees and had built half the commercial buildings in Cedar Falls. The business was worth about $3.2 million, plus I owned 6 rental properties around town and had a decent retirement portfolio. Not bad for a high school dropout who learned carpentry from his father. "What about it?" I asked, settling across from him. Outside, Mrs. Henderson was walking her ancient beagle, same routine she'd kept for the past 15 years. Some things never changed in small towns, and I liked it that way. Marcus opened his briefcase with the kind of precision that reminded me why Sarah fell for him. Everything about the boy was methodical, planned. "Well, I've been doing some research into estate tax law, and with the way things are going politically, there might be some significant changes coming that could really hurt your daughter's inheritance." He pulled out a thick folder filled with official-looking documents. "I know you want to make sure Jennifer and Sarah are taken care of when you're gone. That's what any good father would want." The mention of my daughters always got my attention. Jennifer, 34, was my practical one, married to a decent guy named Tom, 2 kids, worked as a school administrator here in town. Sarah, 28, had always been my wild child until she met Marcus. She'd bounced between jobs, traveled the world on my dime, and generally lived like there was no tomorrow until Marcus brought stability to her life. "What kind of changes?" I asked, leaning forward. The coffee was getting cold, but I hardly noticed. Marcus spread several documents across Patricia's old tablecloth, the one with tiny blue flowers she'd picked out at Brennan's department store 30 years ago. The current estate tax exemption is $12.92 million per person, but there's talk in Congress about reducing that significantly. Could go as low as $3.5 million. He pointed to a chart that showed numbers I couldn't quite make out without my reading glasses. "Your estate, with the business, properties, and investments, is valued at approximately $4.8 million. If these changes go through, your daughters could end up paying hefty taxes on the inheritance." The weight of that hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent nearly 50 years building something to leave behind, something that would give my girls security. The thought of the government taking a chunk of it made my blood pressure spike. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. "Potentially $400,000 to $600,000 in taxes," Marcus said, his voice carrying just the right amount of concern. "Money that should go to Jennifer and Sarah, not to Washington." I sat back in my chair, the same chair where I'd made 1,000 important decisions over the years. Patricia used to joke that I did my best thinking with a cup of coffee and that old Windsor chair creaking under my weight. "So what do you suggest?" Marcus's smile returned, warm and reassuring. "There's a strategy called charitable giving that can significantly reduce estate taxes. Essentially, you make donations to qualified charitable organizations, which reduces the taxable value of your estate. The beauty is, you can structure it so that your daughters still receive the full benefit of your wealth through other mechanisms." He pulled out another document, this one with Midwest Community Foundation letterhead. "I've already done the preliminary research. This foundation does incredible work, supports local schools, helps families in crisis, funds community development projects right here in Iowa. It's exactly the kind of organization you'd want to support anyway." The idea appealed to me. Patricia and I had always believed in giving back to the community that had given us so much. We'd donated quietly over the years, helped families whose breadwinners got injured, contributed to the high school's building fund, supported the food bank every Thanksgiving. "How would it work?" I asked. Marcus spread out what looked like a formal contract. "You'd make a charitable donation of $2 million to the foundation. This immediately reduces your taxable estate to under $3 million, completely eliminating any potential estate tax liability. The foundation invests the money and pays your daughters annual distributions for the rest of their lives." He pulled out a calculator and started running numbers. Based on conservative investment returns, Jennifer and Sarah would each receive approximately $75,000 per year, every year, for life. That's actually more than they'd get from a lump sum inheritance after taxes. The math seemed sound, and the idea of providing my daughters with steady income rather than a one-time payment actually appealed to me. I'd seen too many people blow through inheritances in a few years of poor decisions. "And you've verified this foundation is legitimate?" "Absolutely," Marcus said, pulling out what appeared to be official documentation. "Fully registered 501(c)(3), excellent rating from charity watchdog organizations, solid board of directors. I've actually met with their executive director personally." I studied the documents, but without my reading glasses, the fine print was just a blur of legal language. Marcus seemed to sense my hesitation. "Vernon, I know this is a big decision, and I want you to know I've spent weeks researching this. I love Sarah, and by extension, I love this family. I would never recommend anything that wasn't in everyone's best interest." The sincerity in his voice reminded me why I'd welcomed him into the family so readily. Here was a young man who was looking out for my daughter's future, taking initiative to protect their inheritance. How many sons-in-law would go to such trouble? "I appreciate you looking into this, Marcus," I said. "But I'd like to have my attorney review everything before I make any decisions." Something flickered across Marcus's face, so quickly I almost missed it. Then the smile returned. "Of course, that's perfectly reasonable. The only thing is, my contact at the foundation mentioned they're closing this particular program at the end of the month. Something about changes in federal regulations making it less advantageous for them to offer these structured giving options." He glanced at his watch. "Today's the 27th, so we'd need to move pretty quickly to take advantage of this opportunity." The time pressure made me uncomfortable. Patricia always said that anyone trying to rush you into a financial decision was probably trying to hide something. But then again, bureaucratic deadlines were a real thing, and I'd missed out on opportunities before by being too cautious. "I understand the time crunch," I said carefully, but I really should have Jim Patterson take a look at this. He's handled all my legal work for 20 years. Marcus nodded sympathetically. I completely understand, Vernon. And normally, I'd absolutely agree with you. The challenge is that Jim's practice focuses mainly on local real estate and business law. Estate tax planning, especially at this level, is pretty specialized. I actually took the liberty of researching attorneys in Des Moines who focus specifically on estate planning and tax strategy. He handed me another document. This is from Morrison and Associates. They're considered the top estate planning firm in Iowa, and I had them do a preliminary review of your situation. Their conclusion matches exactly what I've presented to you. The letterhead looked official, and the language was appropriately complex and legal-sounding. But again, without my glasses, I couldn't make out the details. Marcus, I appreciate all the work you've put into this, I really do. But I'm just not comfortable making a $2 million decision without proper legal review. You're absolutely right to be cautious, Marcus said, leaning forward with an earnest expression. That's exactly what I'd want my own father-in-law to do. How about this? What if we structure it so you can reverse the decision if you're not completely satisfied? The foundation offers a 60-day review period where you can withdraw the donation if you change your mind for any reason. That sounded more reasonable. A safety net. Really? They'd allow that? It's standard for large donations like this, Marcus assured me. They want donors to be completely comfortable with their decision. After all, unhappy donors don't make good references for future fundraising. He pulled out another form. This just acknowledges that you understand the 60-day review provision. Sign here, and you've got 2 months to have Jim Patterson or anyone else review the entire arrangement. If you don't like what you find, you simply notify the foundation and your donation is returned in full. The safety net made all the difference. What was the harm in moving forward with a 60-day escape clause? And my daughters know about this plan? I wanted to get your approval first, Marcus said. But I know they'll be thrilled. Jennifer especially, with Tom's job at the plant being uncertain, that annual income would really help with the kids' college funds. He was right about that. Tom had been worried about layoffs at the manufacturing plant, and Jennifer had mentioned concerns about affording college for both kids when the time came. I looked out the window again. Mrs. Henderson had finished her walk and was back inside, probably settling in with her morning talk shows. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, full of families I'd helped build homes for over the decades. This was my community, and the idea of supporting local charities while protecting my daughter's inheritance felt right. Okay, I said finally. But I want that 60-day review period documented clearly. Absolutely, Marcus said, his relief evident. I've got all the paperwork right here, and everything's already been prepared by the attorneys. As I signed the documents, I felt a mixture of pride and satisfaction. Here I was, making a smart financial decision that would benefit my daughters while supporting the community I loved. Marcus had done his homework, found a solution that worked for everyone, and even built in safeguards to protect me. After Marcus left, I called Jennifer to let her know about the arrangement. Dad, are you sure about this? She asked, her voice carrying that note of concern she'd inherited from her mother. It sounds pretty complicated. Marcus has done all the research, honey, I assured her. And there's a 60-day review period, so if anything doesn't look right, I can back out completely. Well, if Marcus recommended it, it's probably solid, she said. That boy's got a good head for business. Sarah's lucky to have found him. That evening, I called Sarah to fill her in on the details. Oh my God, Dad, that's amazing, she practically squealed into the phone. Marcus mentioned he was looking into some estate planning stuff, but I had no idea he was working on something this comprehensive. We're so lucky to have him, aren't we? We sure are, I agreed. That husband of yours has a real gift for this financial stuff. I keep telling him he should start his own consulting practice, Sarah said. He's always helping people optimize their investments and taxes. Just last month, he helped our neighbor restructure their retirement accounts and probably saved them $30,000 a year. After hanging up, I sat in my living room, looking at the family photos that cover the mantelpiece. Patricia and me on our wedding day, 43 years ago. The girls at various ages, from gap-toothed elementary school pictures to their high school graduations. Sarah's wedding photo, with Marcus looking proud and handsome in his tuxedo. I felt good about the decision. Maybe the best I'd felt about anything since Patricia passed. I was taking care of my daughter's future while supporting the community that had been so good to me. And I had a son-in-law smart enough to navigate the complexities of modern estate planning. If only I'd known that the documents I'd signed weren't what Marcus had described. If only I'd insisted on reading every word with my glasses on. If only I'd listened to that small voice in the back of my head that wondered why everything had to happen so fast. But at 72, I was still learning that trust could be the most dangerous gift you give to someone. If you're enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life drama stories like this one. 3 weeks after signing those documents, I should have been sleeping peacefully, knowing I'd secured my daughter's futures. Instead, I found myself lying awake at 2:47 a.m., staring at the ceiling of the bedroom Patricia and I had shared for 40 years. Something was gnawing at me. Maybe it was the way Marcus had rushed through everything, or maybe it was just the natural caution that comes from building a business from scratch. You don't survive nearly 50 years in construction without developing a nose for when something doesn't smell right. I'd tried calling the Midwest Community Foundation twice in the past week, just to confirm the donation had been processed correctly. Both times, I got a generic voicemail system that didn't sound particularly professional. When I asked Marcus about it, he explained they were transitioning to a new phone system and suggested I give them another week to get everything sorted out. That morning, I decided to drive to the address listed on the foundation paperwork. It was about 40 minutes south of Cedar Falls, in what Marcus had described as their satellite office. The October sky was steel gray, threatening rain, as I pulled my old F-150 into the parking lot of a small strip mall. The address led me to a narrow storefront squeezed between a nail salon and a tax preparation service that looked like it had been closed for months. The windows were covered with brown paper, and a simple sign read Midwest Community Foundation, by appointment only. I tried the door handle. Locked, of course. I peered through a gap in the paper covering the window, but all I could see was an empty room with bare white walls and a few folding chairs scattered around. "Can I help you?" I turned to find a middle-aged woman coming out of the nail salon, keys jingling in her hand. "I'm looking for someone from the Midwest Community Foundation," I said. "I made a donation recently and wanted to follow up." She gave me a puzzled look. "Honey, that office has been empty for at least 6 months. Before that, it was some kind of insurance agency, but they cleared out last spring." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. "Are you sure? Maybe they just moved in recently." "Positive," she said, shaking her head. "My sister owns this strip mall. That space has been sitting empty because the previous tenant left owing 3 months' rent. She's been trying to find someone to lease it, but foot traffic here isn't great." I thanked her and walked back to my truck on unsteady legs. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus's number. "Vernon, hi." His voice was as cheerful as ever. "What can I do for you?" "Marcus, I'm standing in front of the Midwest Community Foundation office, and it's completely empty. The neighbor says it's been vacant for months." There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Oh, you drove all the way out there?" I should have mentioned they're in the process of relocating their offices. "The woman you spoke to is probably thinking of the old tenant. The foundation has been using the space for document storage and client meetings, but they're not doing daily operations from that location." His explanation sounded reasonable, but something in his tone was different. Less warm, more rehearsed. Marcus, I need you to give me the direct phone number for someone at this foundation. I want to speak with a real person about my donation. Of course, that's completely understandable. Let me reach out to my contact there and get you connected with the right person. These charitable organizations can be a little protective of donor privacy, so it's better if the introduction comes through official channels. How long will that take? I should be able to get you connected by the end of the week, Marcus said. Is everything okay? You sound worried. I wanted to tell him about the knot in my stomach, about the sleepless nights, about the way my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. But he was family, and Patricia had always said I could be overly suspicious when I was stressed. I just want to make sure everything is legitimate, I said. Absolutely, I completely understand. Family money is nothing to take lightly. I'll make those calls today and get back to you. After hanging up, I sat in my truck for a long time, watching the rain start to spatter against the windshield. 47 years of making business decisions had taught me to trust my gut, and my gut was telling me I'd made a terrible mistake. When I got home, I called Jim Patterson, my attorney. His secretary said he was in court all day, but she could squeeze me in for a quick phone consultation around 5 p.m. Vernon, good to hear from you, Jim said when he called. What's on your mind? I explained the situation as clearly as I could, the estate planning concerns, Marcus's research, the charitable donation strategy, and my growing unease about the foundation. Jim was quiet for a long moment. Vernon, I have to be honest with you. What you're describing sounds like it could be a sophisticated fraud scheme. These kinds of fake charity setups are becoming more common, especially targeting older individuals with significant assets. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. But Marcus is my son-in-law. He's married to Sarah. Why would he? Family members perpetrate financial elder abuse more often than strangers do, Jim said gently. I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but given what you've told me about the empty office and the pressure tactics, I think we need to investigate this immediately. What should I do? First, don't sign anything else. Second, I want you to bring me all the documents you signed, every single piece of paper. Third, we're going to start making some calls tomorrow morning to verify whether this foundation actually exists as a legitimate charitable organization. That evening, I spread all the documents Marcus had given me across my dining room table. With my reading glasses on and a bright lamp pulled close, I began reading every word of what I'd signed. It took me 3 hours to work through the legal language, cross-referencing terms I didn't understand with online legal dictionaries. What I found made my blood run cold. The documents weren't for a charitable donation at all. What I'd actually signed was a quitclaim deed transferring ownership of 3 of my rental properties directly to something called Midcoast Holdings LLC. The 60-day review period Marcus had mentioned was actually a 60-day period for the new owners, Midcoast Holdings, to review the properties for any title issues. There was no charitable foundation. No annual distributions to my daughters. No estate tax benefits. I had signed away $1.2 million worth of real estate to a company I'd never heard of. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. I stumbled to the kitchen and poured myself 3 fingers of the bourbon Patricia used to scold me for keeping in the house. The alcohol burned, but it steadied my nerves enough to think clearly. I needed to find out who owned Midcoast Holdings LLC. A quick internet search led me to the Iowa Secretary of State's Business Registration Database. Midcoast Holdings LLC had been incorporated just 6 weeks ago. The registered agent was listed as Marcus Chen, with an address that I recognized as his and Sarah's apartment across town. My son-in-law had stolen $1.2 million worth of my property using forged documents and an elaborate story about estate planning. The worst part wasn't the money, though the loss of those rental properties would significantly impact my retirement security. The worst part was realizing that Sarah had to be involved. There was no way Marcus could have pulled this off without her knowledge. My youngest daughter, the wild child I'd spoiled and supported through every crazy phase of her 20s, was helping her husband steal my life's work. I poured another bourbon and sat in Patricia's old chair, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd lived for 38 years. Mrs. Henderson was probably settling in for the evening news. The Kowalski kids were playing in their backyard, same as always. Everything looked normal and peaceful. But my world had just collapsed. I knew I needed to call the police, but something held me back. Maybe it was the hope that there was still some innocent explanation. Maybe it was the devastating realization that pressing charges would mean watching my daughter go to prison. Or maybe I was just an old fool who couldn't accept that his family had betrayed him. Instead, I called Sarah. "Dad. How are you doing?" Her voice was bright and cheerful, exactly the same as it had always been. "Sarah, I need you to be completely honest with me about something." "Of course, Dad." "What is it?" "Do you know what Midcoast Holdings LLC is?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Sarah? Are you there?" "Dad, where did you hear that name?" "Answer my question, honey. Do you know what Midcoast Holdings is?" Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Smaller. Guilty. "Dad, I can explain." "So you do know." "It's not what you think. Marcus was trying to help protect your assets, but the legal structure was more complicated than he initially explained. He was going to talk to you about it this weekend." The lies came so smoothly, I realized this wasn't Sarah's first experience with deception. "Sarah, I want you and Marcus to come over here right now. We're going to sit down and go through every document I signed, and you're going to explain to me exactly what's going on. Dad, it's getting late, and Marcus has an early meeting tomorrow. Right now, Sarah. Both of you. Or I'm calling the police." "The police?" "Dad, you're scaring me. There's no reason to involve." "1 hour," I said, and hung up. I spent that hour pacing through the house Patricia and I had filled with 40 years of memories. Pictures of Sarah's high school graduation, her college trips to Europe that I'd funded, her wedding where I'd walked her down the aisle with tears of pride in my eyes. Had she been planning this betrayal even then? Exactly 58 minutes later, I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I watched Marcus and Sarah walk toward my front door. Marcus carried his ever-present briefcase, and Sarah was twisting her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. They knocked instead of using Sarah's key, which told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation was going to go. When I opened the door, Marcus stepped forward with his familiar smile, but it looked strained around the edges. "Vernon, Sarah said you had some concerns about the property arrangements." "I'm glad you called. I was actually planning to set up a meeting to walk you through some additional details." "Come in and sit down," I said, leading them to the living room. "Both of you." I'd arranged all the documents on the coffee table, organized chronologically. The fake foundation paperwork, the real quitclaim deeds, the LLC registration showing Marcus as the registered agent. "Now," I said, settling into my chair and looking directly at my daughter, "I want you to explain to me how you justified stealing from your own father." Sarah's face crumpled, and she started crying immediately. But Marcus maintained his composure, leaning forward with his hands clasped. "Vernon, I understand why you're upset, and you have every right to be concerned about documents you don't fully understand. But I want to assure you that everything we've done has been with your best interests and your daughter's futures in mind. Stop lying to me, Marcus. There is no Midwest Community Foundation. You forged charitable donation documents to trick me into signing quitclaim deeds. You stole 3 of my properties and put them into a company you control." Sarah looked up through her tears. "Dad, we were going to tell you." "When?" After you'd sold everything and disappeared with the money? Marcus held up a hand. Vernon, I know how this looks, but the legal structure we've created actually provides better protection for your assets than traditional estate planning. The properties are still functionally yours, you'll continue receiving all rental income, but they're protected from potential creditors and estate taxes. Then why did you lie about it? Why the fake foundation story? Because we knew you'd resist any arrangement that seemed too complicated, Marcus said. You're old school, Vernon. You like simple, straightforward deals. But modern asset protection requires more sophisticated structures. It was impressive, really, how smoothly the lies flowed. If I hadn't spent 3 hours reading every word of the documents, I might have been convinced. Show me the rental income, I said. What do you mean? The rental income from those 3 properties. You say I'll continue receiving it. Show me where that's documented in the paperwork. Marcus opened his briefcase and started shuffling through documents. It's handled through a separate management agreement. Marcus, stop. Just stop lying. I pulled out the articles of incorporation for Midcoast Holdings. You're listed as the sole member of this LLC. There's no management agreement that pays me rental income. There is no asset protection structure. You tricked me into signing away $1.2 million worth of property, and now you're sitting in my living room lying to my face about it. The mask finally slipped. Marcus's friendly demeanor evaporated, replaced by something cold and calculating. Vernon, you need to understand something. Sarah and I have been supporting you emotionally and financially since your wife died. We moved in here, we take care of the house maintenance, we make sure you're not isolated and alone. That has value. Are you seriously trying to justify stealing from me by claiming you deserve payment for being decent human beings? We're not stealing anything, Marcus said, his voice hardening. We're ensuring that the wealth you've accumulated doesn't get wasted or mismanaged in your declining years. Sarah will inherit everything eventually anyway. We're just structuring things more efficiently. Sarah was sobbing now, but she wasn't disagreeing with her husband. Get out, I said quietly. Dad, Sarah started. Both of you. Get out of my house right now. Marcus stood up, straightening his tie. Vernon, I hope you'll reconsider your reaction once you've had time to think this through rationally. We're family, and family should work together. Family doesn't steal from each other, I said. And family doesn't lie to each other. As they walked toward the door, Sarah turned back. Dad, I love you. We can fix this. Sarah, the only way this gets fixed is if those properties are transferred back to me immediately. Otherwise, I'm calling the police tomorrow morning. Marcus put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. That's your choice, Vernon. But you might want to consider what happens to your relationship with your daughter if you decide to press charges against her husband. The threat was clear, and it hit exactly where he intended it to. Even as Sarah was betraying me, I couldn't bear the thought of losing her forever. After they left, I sat alone in my living room until dawn, wrestling with the most painful decision of my 72 years. Call the police and potentially lose my daughter forever, or let them get away with stealing my life's work. Either choice would destroy what remained of my family. But as the sun came up over Cedar Falls, painting the sky the same soft pink Patricia used to love, I realized there was really only one choice I could live with. I was going to fight back. The next morning, I called Jim Patterson at exactly 8 a.m., as soon as his office opened. Jim, it's worse than we thought, I said, my voice hoarse from a sleepless night. They forged documents. My son-in-law created a fake charity story to trick me into signing quitclaim deeds. Jesus, Vernon. Do you have all the paperwork? Every piece of it. And I confronted them last night. Marcus basically admitted to everything, tried to justify it as asset protection. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Don't touch anything else, don't sign anything, Don't make any more payments on those properties. I'm calling the state attorney general's office this morning, and we're filing a police report this afternoon. After hanging up with Jim, I did something I hadn't done since Patricia's funeral. I called my older daughter, Jennifer. Dad? It's early, is everything okay? I took a deep breath. Jenny, I need to tell you something about your sister and Marcus. And it's going to be hard to hear. I explained everything, from the initial estate planning conversation to last night's confrontation. Jennifer listened without interrupting, but I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I got to the part about the forged documents. Dad, are you absolutely certain about this? I mean, Sarah can be irresponsible with money, but this is criminal fraud. I'm certain, honey. I've got all the documents, and I've confirmed that the charity doesn't exist. Marcus created an LLC and tricked me into signing my properties over to it. Oh my God. Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have been paying closer attention. Tom and I just assumed Marcus knew what he was doing with financial stuff. This isn't your fault, Jenny. But I need you to know that I'm going to press charges. Your sister is probably going to go to prison. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Jenny? I'm here, Dad. I'm just processing this. Sarah's my little sister, you know? But what they did to you. Dad, you have to press charges. You can't let them get away with this. The relief I felt at having Jennifer's support nearly brought me to tears. Where are you listening to this story from? I'd love to hear from viewers across the country in the comments below. That afternoon, Jim and I walked into the Cedar Falls Police Department. Detective Maria Santos, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, took our statement with the kind of professional thoroughness that gave me hope. Mr. Barnes, I want you to understand that cases involving family members can be emotionally complex, but what you're describing is straightforward fraud, she said after reviewing all the documents. The forged charity paperwork, the fake foundation, the quitclaim deeds, this meets all the elements for multiple felony charges. What happens next? We'll start by investigating the LLC registration and tracing any financial transactions. If they've already sold or mortgaged these properties, that adds additional charges. We'll also need to look into whether there are other victims. Other victims? Detective Santos nodded grimly. Sophisticated fraud schemes like this are rarely one-time events. If your son-in-law was willing to steal from family, he's probably done this before. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within a week, Detective Santos called to tell me they'd uncovered evidence that Midcoast Holdings had already taken out a $400,000 mortgage against one of my properties. The loan application lists Marcus Chen as the owner of the property, with forged documents supporting his claim, she explained. He used your rental income history to qualify for the loan, but the money went into accounts he controls. So he's already stolen $400,000 in cash, plus the properties? That's correct. And Mr. Barnes, we found something else. Your son-in-law has a history. He was investigated for a similar scheme in Minnesota 3 years ago, but the victims declined to press charges. The betrayal felt even deeper knowing that Sarah had married a man with a history of financial fraud. Had she known? Had she helped him target other families before mine? 2 days later, at 6:47 a.m., I was having my morning coffee when I saw police cars pulling into Sarah and Marcus's apartment complex across town. Detective Santos had called the night before to let me know the arrests would happen that morning. My phone rang at 7:15. Dad, please, you have to help us. Sarah's voice was hysterical, barely recognizable. They arrested Marcus, and they're saying I'm going to be charged too. Dad, I never meant for any of this to happen. Sarah, where are you? I'm at the police station. Dad, they won't let me see Marcus, and they're asking me all these questions about the properties and the LLC. I don't know what to say. For a moment, Hearing my daughter's voice break with terror, I wavered. She was still my little girl, the toddler who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her bedtime stories. Sarah, you need to call a lawyer. Don't answer any more questions without an attorney present. I can't afford a lawyer, Dad. All our money was tied up in the business arrangements Marcus was handling. The irony was bitter. The money they'd stolen from me was probably the only way they could afford legal representation. Dad, please. I know we made mistakes, but I'm your daughter. I'll do anything to make this right. Sarah, answer me honestly. Did you know Marcus had done this before? Did you know he had a history of fraud? The pause told me everything I needed to know. Dad, I can explain. You knew. The words felt like glass in my throat. You knew your husband was a con artist, and you helped him target your own father. It wasn't like that. Marcus said the Minnesota thing was a misunderstanding, that the people there were trying to cheat him. And he said the arrangement with your properties would actually benefit everyone. Stop lying, Sarah. Please. Just once, stop lying to me. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. Dad, I'm pregnant. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? I'm 8 weeks pregnant. Dad, if I go to prison, what happens to the baby? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 72 years pressing down on me. My daughter was carrying my grandchild, and she was probably going to prison for stealing my life savings. Sarah, you should have thought about that before you decided to commit felonies. Dad, please. I love you, honey. I will always love you. But I can't help you with this. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. I hung up before she could respond, then sat at my kitchen table and cried for the first time since Patricia's funeral. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and painful family conversations. The local newspaper picked up the story, local businessman's daughter charged in elaborate fraud scheme, and I found myself fielding calls from reporters and distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Jennifer and Tom were incredible during this period, checking on me daily and helping me navigate the legal complexities. But the house felt empty in a way it hadn't even after Patricia died. At least then, I'd still had my daughters. Now I had one daughter supporting me and another facing 15 years in federal prison. The federal charges came down in November. Marcus was indicted on 12 counts, including wire fraud, money laundering, and elder abuse. Sarah was charged with conspiracy and fraud, but her attorney, a public defender who looked barely old enough to vote, negotiated a plea deal. In exchange for testifying against Marcus and providing information about his other potential victims, Sarah would serve 3 years in minimum security prison and pay full restitution. The day of Sarah's sentencing, I sat in the back of the federal courthouse in Des Moines, watching my youngest daughter stand before a judge and accept responsibility for stealing from her own father. Your Honor, Sarah said during her statement, I know that nothing I say can undo the pain I've caused my family. My father worked his entire life to build something meaningful, and I helped destroy it because I was weak and selfish. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday I can find a way to make amends. She looked back at me once during the proceedings, her eyes red with tears and her hand resting on the small bump that was just beginning to show. I nodded at her, not forgiveness, exactly, but acknowledgement that she was still my daughter, even if I didn't know what that meant anymore. Marcus showed no remorse. During his sentencing hearing, he argued that he'd been providing valuable financial services and that the whole situation was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an elderly man who didn't understand modern asset protection strategies. He got 15 years. The morning after the sentencing, I stood in my driveway looking at the house Patricia and I had shared for 4 decades. The maple trees were bare now, their branches reaching toward a gray December sky like arthritic fingers. Detective Santos had told me that full restitution was unlikely. Marcus had already spent most of the stolen money, and what remained was tied up in legal proceedings that could take years to resolve. The properties would eventually be returned to me, but the mortgage he'd taken out against one of them meant I'd lost significant equity. At my age, there wasn't enough time left to rebuild what I'd lost. But as I walked back toward my front door, I realized something important. I was still standing. Marcus and Sarah had taken my money, damaged my trust and family, and torn apart everything I thought I knew about the people I loved most. But they hadn't broken me. I pulled out my phone and called Jennifer. "Dad? How are you holding up?" "I'm okay, honey. Better than okay, actually. I was wondering if you and Tom and the kids would like to come over for dinner this weekend. I was thinking about making your mother's pot roast." "Dad, we'd love that. Are you sure you're up for cooking for everyone?" I looked through my kitchen window at Mrs. Henderson walking her ancient beagle, at the Kowalski kids building a snowman in their backyard, at the neighborhood that had been my home for 38 years. "I'm sure, Jenny. It's time to start building something new." 6 months later, I was standing in the nursery of the Cedar Falls Women's Correctional Facility, holding my granddaughter for the first time. Emma Grace was born on a humid Tuesday in July, 8 pounds and 2 ounces of pure innocence in a world that had suddenly become much more complicated. Sarah had been allowed to keep the baby with her for the first 6 weeks, but now it was time for Emma to come home with me. "Dad, are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked older than her 29 years, wearing the standard-issue gray jumpsuit that marked her as an inmate. The wild child who used to travel the world on my dime was gone, replaced by a woman who understood the weight of consequences. "I'm sure, honey," I said, adjusting the baby blanket around Emma's tiny face. "This little girl deserves better than the foster care system, and she deserves to know her family." Sarah started crying then, not the manipulative tears she'd used during the fraud trial, but the quiet, desperate tears of a mother watching her child leave without her. "I don't deserve this kindness," she whispered. "No," I agreed. "You don't. But Emma does. And maybe this is how we start finding our way back to being a family." Taking care of a newborn at 73 wasn't something I'd planned for my retirement years. The sleepless nights were harder on my old bones than they used to be, and I had to relearn skills I hadn't used since Sarah was born. But every time Emma looked up at me with those bright blue eyes, Patricia's eyes, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Jennifer was incredible during those first weeks. She'd come over every day after work to help with feedings and diaper changes, bringing her own kids along so Emma would grow up knowing her cousins. "Dad, you know you don't have to do this alone," Jennifer said one evening as we sat on my front porch watching her children play in the yard. Emma was sleeping peacefully in my arms, making those tiny baby sounds that reminded me how precious life could be. "I know, honey. But I want to. This little girl didn't ask for any of this mess, and she's the only good thing that came out of it. What about when Sarah gets out? Emma will be 3 years old. That's going to be a complicated situation." I'd been thinking about that question for months. "We'll deal with it when the time comes. Sarah's going to have to prove she's changed, that she's become someone who can be trusted with her daughter's well-being. Until then, Emma stays with me." The legal arrangements had been surprisingly straightforward. Marcus had signed away all parental rights from prison. Apparently, even he had enough decency left not to saddle a child with his legacy. Sarah had agreed to let me have temporary guardianship, with the understanding that we'd revisit custody arrangements when she was released. As autumn arrived again, I established new routines. Morning coffee was now accompanied by preparing bottles and checking on a sleeping baby. My workshop in the basement became a playroom, filled with toys and safety equipment. Mrs. Henderson, who I'd barely spoken to beyond polite greetings for 15 years, became an unexpected ally, offering to babysit whenever I needed to run errands. "That little one has brought some life back to this neighborhood," she told me one October morning as we watched Emma explore my backyard in her bouncy seat. "Haven't heard so much laughter from your house since Patricia was with us." She was right. Emma's presence had changed everything about how I experienced my own home. The silence that had felt so oppressive after Patricia died was now filled with baby sounds, crying, yes, but also gurgling, and the tiny noises she made when she was content. The financial situation was slowly improving. The FBI had recovered about 60% of the stolen money, and the properties were back in my name. The mortgage Marcus had taken out was more complicated, but Jim Patterson was confident we could resolve it through the courts. "You'll never get back everything you lost," Jim told me during one of our regular check-ins. "But you'll be financially stable, and that's more than a lot of fraud victims can say." More importantly, I was building something new. Something that felt more meaningful than just accumulating wealth to pass down to the next generation. I started a scholarship fund at the local high school, the Patricia Barnes Memorial Scholarship for students pursuing trade careers. Instead of just leaving money to my daughters, I was investing in young people who reminded me of myself at 18, hardworking, determined, but lacking the financial resources to pursue their dreams. The first recipient was Maria Santos, no relation to Detective Santos, just a coincidence of common names. She was planning to study electrical work at the community college but couldn't afford the tools and materials. The scholarship covered everything, plus a paid internship with Barnes Construction. "Mr. Barnes, this changes everything for me," she said when I presented her with the award at the high school's graduation ceremony. Emma was there too, 6 months old and babbling happily in Jennifer's arms. "I promise I'll make the most of this opportunity." "I know you will, Maria. Just remember to pay it forward when you get the chance." That became my new philosophy, pay it forward. Instead of dwelling on what had been taken from me, I focused on what I could give to others. The story of my family's betrayal had made me somewhat famous in Cedar Falls, not the kind of fame anyone wants, but it opened doors to help other families. I started volunteering with the local senior center, teaching workshops on financial fraud prevention. "The hardest part isn't losing the money," I would tell groups of older adults. "It's losing your ability to trust the people closest to you. But that doesn't mean you stop trusting altogether. It means you learn to trust more carefully." Detective Santos occasionally referred victims of elder fraud to me, people who were struggling with the emotional aftermath of being swindled by family members. I couldn't give them legal advice, but I could share something more valuable, the knowledge that survival was possible. One particularly difficult case involved an elderly woman named Ruth whose son had stolen her entire retirement savings to fund a gambling addiction. "I feel so stupid," she told me during one of our conversations. How could I not see what was happening? "Ruth, you're not stupid. You're a mother who loved her son and wanted to trust him. That's not a character flaw, that's what makes you human. But how do I move forward? How do I rebuild at my age?" I thought about Emma, sleeping peacefully upstairs in the crib I'd assembled in my bedroom. You start with what you have left, and you build something different. Maybe smaller than what you had before, but maybe more meaningful. As Emma's first birthday approached, I found myself thinking more about Sarah. She called every Sunday, our conversations carefully monitored by prison staff. We talked mostly about Emma, her first words, which were Papa, much to my delight, her first steps, her fascination with the cardboard boxes that seemed more interesting to her than expensive toys. "She looks just like you did at that age," I told Sarah during one call. Same curiosity about everything, same determination to get into things she shouldn't. "Dad, I need you to know something," Sarah said, her voice heavy with emotion. "I think about what I did every single day. Not just because I'm in here, but because I see what I threw away. You were the best father anyone could ask for, and I repaid your love by stealing from you." "Sarah." "No, let me finish. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I want you to know that taking care of Emma, that's the most generous thing anyone has ever done for me. You had every right to let her go to strangers, to wash your hands of all of us. She's my granddaughter, honey. She's family. So was I, and look what I did. The pain in her voice was real, and for the first time since the fraud came to light, I heard genuine remorse rather than self-pity. Sarah, you're still my daughter. What you did was unforgivable, but that doesn't mean I've stopped loving you. It just means the love looks different now. What do you mean? I mean that when you get out, you're going to have to earn back trust one day at a time. You're going to have to prove that you've changed, not just with words but with actions. And even then, things between us will never be the way they were before. I understand. But, I continued, Emma deserves to know her mother. So we're going to figure out how to make that work, as long as you're truly committed to being the person she needs you to be. The conversation left me emotionally drained but oddly hopeful. For the first time, Sarah sounded like she understood the magnitude of what she'd done and was prepared to do the hard work of making amends. That evening, as I was giving Emma her bath, one of our favorite daily rituals, Jennifer stopped by with dinner for both of us. You know, Dad, watching you with Emma has been incredible, she said as we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had first presented his fraudulent documents. You found a way to turn something terrible into something beautiful. I don't know about that, honey. I'm just trying to do right by this little girl. It's more than that. You could have let bitterness consume you. You could have shut everyone out and spent your remaining years angry at the world. Instead, you're raising a baby, helping fraud victims, and even working toward rebuilding a relationship with Sarah. I looked over at Emma in her high chair, happily smearing mashed sweet potatoes across her face and giggling at the mess she was making. You know what I think? I said. I think your mother had something to do with this. Patricia always said that life has a way of balancing things out, that beauty comes from ashes if you're patient enough to wait for it. You really think Mom would approve of all this? I think your mother would say that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Emma doesn't deserve to grow up in a house full of bitterness, and I don't deserve to spend my final years consumed by hatred. Jennifer reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, Dad. For everything. As winter approached again, Emma's second winter, my 74th, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since that October morning when Marcus had first knocked on my door with his briefcase full of lies. I'd lost $400,000 in cash and nearly lost 3 valuable properties. My relationship with my youngest daughter was fundamentally altered, possibly forever. My trust in family had been shattered in ways that would never fully heal. But I'd gained something too, a granddaughter who brought joy to every day, a deeper relationship with Jennifer and her family, meaningful work helping other fraud victims, and a sense of purpose that extended beyond just accumulating wealth. Most importantly, I'd learned that resilience isn't about avoiding pain, it's about transforming pain into something useful. Emma was walking now, toddling around the house with the fearless determination that only comes from not yet understanding that the world can be dangerous. She called me Papa and had no idea that her father was a criminal or that her mother was in prison. To her, our little family was perfectly normal. And maybe it was. Maybe family isn't about blood or legal documents or perfect people making perfect choices. Maybe family is about showing up, day after day, and choosing love even when it's difficult. As I tucked Emma into her crib that night, she looked up at me with Patricia's blue eyes and said, "Love you, Papa." "I love you too, little one," I whispered back. "More than you'll ever know." Standing in the doorway of her nursery, listening to her soft breathing as she drifted off to sleep, I realized that Marcus and Sarah had stolen my money, but they'd also given me the greatest gift of my final years, the chance to be a father again, to help shape a child who would grow up knowing that love is stronger than betrayal, that trust can be rebuilt, and that family is what you make it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Sarah would eventually be released, and we'd have to navigate the complicated process of rebuilding our relationship while protecting Emma's best interests. There would be legal proceedings, financial decisions, and difficult conversations. But tonight, in a house filled with the quiet sounds of a sleeping baby, I felt something I hadn't experienced in nearly 2 years: complete peace. Patricia would have been proud. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about family, betrayal, and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced betrayal by someone you trusted? How did you find the strength to move forward? Emma is 4 years old now, a bright, curious little girl who loves helping me in the garden and reading stories to her stuffed animals. She starts kindergarten this fall, and I've been teaching her to tie her shoes and ride a bike without training wheels. Sarah was released 6 months ago. True to her word, she's been working steadily to rebuild her life and earn back trust. She found a job at a local restaurant, enrolled in community college to study social work, and meets with a counselor twice a week to address the issues that led to her criminal behavior. Most importantly, she's been patient with the slow process of rebuilding our relationship and establishing a healthy connection with Emma. "Dad, I know I have no right to ask this," Sarah said during one of our carefully supervised visits, "but do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me completely?" I watched Emma playing with blocks on the living room floor, building elaborate structures and knocking them down with delighted giggles. "I think forgiveness is like trust," I told her. "It's not something that happens all at once. It's something you earn one day at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one good choice at a time." Sarah nodded, understanding that she still had work to do. Marcus, as far as I know, is still in federal prison. He'll be eligible for parole in 8 years, but given his lack of remorse and the severity of his crimes, I doubt he'll be released early. Emma asks about her daddy sometimes, and I tell her the truth in age-appropriate ways, that her daddy made some very bad choices and is in a place where people go when they need to learn how to make better choices. When she's older, we'll have more detailed conversations. For now, she's surrounded by love and doesn't lack for father figures. Jennifer's kids adore their little cousin, and Tom has become the grandfather figure Emma deserves. We have family dinners every Sunday, and the house is once again filled with the sounds of children playing and adults laughing. The Patricia Barnes Memorial Scholarship has grown into a substantial program that has helped 43 young people pursue trade careers. Maria Santos, our first recipient, graduated from the electrical program with honors and now works for a construction company in Des Moines. She stops by occasionally to thank me and to meet Emma. "Mr. Barnes, you changed my life," she told me during her last visit. "I'm saving money to start my own electrical contracting business, and when I do, I want to fund a scholarship too." "That's exactly what your grandmother would have wanted to hear," I told Emma later that day. People helping people, kindness multiplying like ripples in a pond. At 76, I'm in good health and blessed with more energy than I probably deserve. Emma keeps me young, and having a purpose beyond myself keeps me motivated. I still volunteer with fraud victims, and Detective Santos occasionally asks me to speak with elderly people who've been targeted by scammers. The key, I tell them, is not to let the criminals win by destroying your ability to trust and love. Yes, be more careful. Yes, verify everything. But don't let their evil turn you into someone bitter and closed off from the world. As I write this, Emma is napping on the couch beside me, exhausted from a morning of helping me plant tomatoes in Patricia's old garden. Her small hand is curled around her favorite stuffed elephant, and her breathing is soft and peaceful. In a few hours, she'll wake up wanting a snack and asking a million questions about everything she sees. We'll read stories together, and she'll help me make dinner, probably making more mess than actual help, but filling the kitchen with laughter. Tonight, Jennifer and her family will come over for our weekly dinner. Tom will tell his terrible dad jokes, the kids will argue over who gets the last dinner roll, and we'll end the evening with everyone piled together on the couch watching a Disney movie. It's not the family I expected to have at this stage of my life. It's not the retirement I planned when I was building Barnes Construction and dreaming of leaving everything to my daughters. But it's a good life. A life built on love and second chances, on the belief that people can change and that families can heal from even the deepest wounds. Marcus tried to destroy everything I had built, and Sarah helped him do it. They succeeded in taking my money and shattering my trust. But they failed to break my spirit. They failed to destroy my capacity for love. And they failed to prevent me from building something new and beautiful from the ruins of what they'd torn down. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's living well, loving deeply, and proving that their worst actions couldn't diminish your best qualities. Emma is stirring now, making the soft noises that mean she'll be fully awake in a few minutes. Soon she'll want to hear the story about the princess and the dragon, or help me fold laundry, or convince me that ice cream is an appropriate afternoon snack. And I'll say yes to whatever she wants, because at 76, I've learned that time with the people you love is the only wealth that really matters. The man who signed those fraudulent documents 2.5 years ago was a victim. The man writing this today is a survivor who chose to transform his pain into purpose, his betrayal into a deeper understanding of what family really means. That man, this man, is richer than he's ever been. Thank you for listening to Vernon's story. If this touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to start over. Subscribe for more real-life stories of courage, family, and the strength of the human spirit. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives are written after we thought the story was over.